Okay, so between 1945 and 1960 is the greatest period of economic expansion known in the United States of America. What happens in this period is you have the baby boom. Everybody's rushing to the move to try and get away from the cities and this old way of economic life and how things used to be. And you also, the passing of the GI Bill, and you also have the Nuremberg war trials that go on in this period as well. This isn't and now that's a different story, I'll get to that later. Now, what happens is what I find incredibly interesting is the GI Bill. Now, this is interesting for the fact that we are giving free education. These war heroes, soldiers, came back from fighting over in Germany, and what happened is they most of them gave up points in high school, they gave up careers, things along these lines. Couldn't get them back. They couldn't get that time back. So what happens is they were offered the opportunity to get a higher level of education. And many became engineers, foremen in certain offices, things along these lines. They became higher up in society, but not the incredible 1 to 6%. They were doing, however, they were doing very, very well. So this is kind of where you see the beginning of the birth of this kind of upper middle class family. What everybody pictures, the two kids, white picket fence, that whole area. Now, this wasn't the case for everyone. However, it was beginning to become more common that you would not be renting anymore. As originally, most of American property, you didn't own it, you rented. As most people lived in the cities and they didn't really feel a need to own their own space. So at this point in time, you see this massive change in people. Everybody kind of leaves what they knew in the city and just kind of this whole idea of having either a condo or a small apartment or a townhouse or something along these lines, and they leave for suburbia because everybody kind of wants to show their own wealth. And this is what happens in this case. You have the buildup of the suburbia. Everybody just kind of moves off into the land, and now what we think as the norm is you have your own house, two cars, everybody drives. That wasn't the norm originally. That was added on later. And most car companies took advantage of that. This was a huge period of economic growth, so you can see that in the car companies. You'll see that they do their best advertising. The woman needs her own car and the man needs his own car. So you'll see that in the whole economic expansion and the whole expansion of everything. This became the norm that a man has his own car so he can go to work, and he'd be taking the highway so that the women then can take the children to wherever they need to go. And also with the loss of everybody leaving the cities, you have these local shops move. Most of them move out, and then this whole different group of people will come into the cities, and this is kind of where you see the crime in certain parts of the city really start up even more than it had before. And it just happened. Now we think of this as normal, but that wasn't the case. I just when you think about it, little kids, you hear the stories that little kids would be sent down to go pick up something at the corner store. Now that doesn't happen anymore. It just didn't. Now, not the norm. It's just now it's thought of as very dangerous. But before the war, that was just a normal thing that you did. And then you also have the baby boom, which happened. As you can see, all these people are beginning to be successful. All these ex-soldiers came in. They have their college degrees. They're working hard. They're trying to make money. They're starting to carve their own way in the world. And so they figure they're going to basically start their own family. And they all almost seem to have that thought almost at the exact same time. In the sense that, and it's interesting when you think about it, as you can track this whole bulge of people through basically the entire life, as you can see the basically where they were needed and at what time when they were children on their own, when they were children. And so you can see the need for baby clothes, diapers, small children's toys, changing tables, strollers, that kind of whole industry, you can see did really well for a period of time while all these children were so young. And then as they get up and they're kids and they're playing, the need for toys comes up, the need for bed comes up, shoes, toys, lights, lamps, things along these lines, anything that a child would need, bicycles, anything like that. They would need that. They would want that. so then that that whole area is expanded and becomes more and more and more. And then see it kind of starts fizzling out, and as well as the need for schools, teachers, things like that. It just you needed more of it. And then what happens when they leave? You have these old empty buildings that just they're not in use anymore. They're not needed. You don't need that many people. And then what happens? You get further up, and when they're adults, you need more production of cars, car tires, jobs are needed, desks are needed for offices, computers, things like that. And then they're more and more produced. So what happens when they get older? And see, that's the worry of so many people now. And what's going to happen to the Social Security system? That's another very large worry of most people that happens as these children from the baby boomers, as they've been tracked through their economic growth, and what happens later is the biggest question. And then going backwards a little bit, you have the Nuremberg war trials. What I find particularly interesting about this period is the way that some of these Nazi war criminals were executed, and the fact that we go back to older methods of killing and torture, in the sense that now most people stopped hanging almost at that point in time, almost 100 years ago. Uh, and that just became it wasn't a practice anymore. Once there were other methods developed, like the electric chair, lethal injection, things along those lines, that just became considered inhumane. So when I was reading this, I found this incredibly interesting, that we go back and you have these 12 Nazi war criminals. They were hung to death versus any other modern humane method of execution, as well as then the others were shot. Now that was normal, but I just find that interesting that we went back to almost a much older method of torture. I think it was, in my thinking, I thought it was almost to prove a point that this is what happens to those who do these heinous and horrible crimes. And that's all I got.